Johnny Mack in the house here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as the Eagles get ready for the Vikings. A lot to dive into on this game and, of course, around the NFL with John. John, what's happening, my friend?
How are you guys?
Of course, we're doing well. We're here at Chickies. You'll be over at the Landmark tonight with Jeff Mosher for Mosher, McMullen, and Krause. Great Thursday night show. If you guys have not got a chance to listen to that, two great football guys, sometimes agreeing, sometimes disagreeing, going back and forth with Krause kind of monitoring it in the middle. So 6 to 8 tonight, right after us, probably the best football show on the radio. It's right after us with Mosher, McMullen, and Krause. And we'll start with this. Corey Clement, the quad problem, we saw that. Remains sidelined today. We kind of talked about him and how necessary he kind of is to this running game, or him or Sproles, one or the other, and the possibility that they could be out with be without both of those guys again this week, John.
Yeah, it's a possibility. Both still not at practice today, although Corey was working on a separate field, so he seems to be a little bit closer. I think it's bigger for the passing game, to be honest, and that's from a blitz pickup standpoint. It was pretty evident in Nashville that the Eagles are going to struggle when it comes to blitz pickups. Without Darren or Corey, the best case scenario would be Darren Sproles, but Corey improved greatly as the season wore on last year, and certainly was capable at it. And without those two guys, it becomes an issue because Jay Ajayi, Wendell Smallwood, Josh Adams can't do it. And poor Wendell, because the other two are even worse than him, he's got to be thrown out there and criticized for it.
Hey, when you look at, we were going back and forth, we talk about a lot, the defense against the offense. For me, I have more concern with this offense moving forward. Like, to me, I'm willing to wait to see what happens Sunday. All right, let's see how they play against the Vikings. Are they just – because we went back and looked last year. They gave up 18 points a game last year. They're giving up 20 points a game this year. So I feel like the sample size of the 3 plays in overtime has everybody, hitting somewhat of a panic button about this defense. But me, John, it's this offense that needs to start kicking into another gear. My question really is it as simple as Wentz gets his feet under week 3, week 4, they're going to start hitting stride? Or is there some legitimate concern that they don't have that gear in them to be the – because, look, they gave up 38 points in L.A. last year. They scored 41. I don't know that they're that same offense that they can have that kind of game if their defense isn't churning out some stops.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I agree with you early in the season at the quarter pole. I think the offense has been the bigger issue. Now, remember, you only had Carson Wentz for 2 of those games, and all the injury issues at receiver, you're slowly getting back to normal, at least as close to normal as you're going to be, with Alshon Jeffrey back in the lineup, and you're hopeful that Nelson Aguilar is not going to play like he did against Tennessee again, because then it becomes a bigger issue. So I think things will start to smooth out on the offensive side of the football. Defensively, talked about it a lot on the show. I don't know what people are looking for. I've described it as myopic. They are not looking at the rest of the league. You look at Philadelphia, they're top 10 yardage points. They're a top 10 defense. The reality, here's my I've been giving this stat of the day to prove this every day. Here's my stat of the day today. 9 teams in the NFL are averaging over 400 yards a game. 0 did last year. 0. Wow. Eagles are top 10. It's going to be like this. It's going to be a struggle.
Right. It's like we're ready to acknowledge that the game is changing, but we're not ready to acknowledge that the change that are coming with it is causing your defense to look like it's suffering a little bit.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And that's where I point out, and it's not only Philadelphia. I point it out all the time. It's every NFL city. They get caught up in their own team, and they're not looking at other teams. You don't have to look very far. The Vikings are coming in this week. Now, they were the number 1 defense in the NFL last year. Number 1. They can't stop anybody. They have 3 first-round picks. at playing cornerback for them, and they can't stop anybody. So I don't know what people expect. I really don't.
Should we expect anything from the level of desperation, John, that the Vikings are I don't know how much they have it, but at least they're associated with. They lose this game, that's it. They come off one of the worst losses in franchise history against the Bills a couple weeks, and all of these things would lead to their backs to the wall. But then you look at how well the defense has played, to your point, even on the road, let alone at home. I just don't know how to approach Minnesota's associated desperation.
Well, I'm sure they will be desperate, and you never know. You just mentioned Buffalo going into Minnesota as one of the biggest upsets from a point spread standpoint in history. So things can happen in this league. This is not college football, but this is, I've talked about it a lot, this is a bad matchup for Minnesota. Just the styles, they struggle on the offensive line. Strength of the Eagles is the defensive line. So a lot of it is they can't run the ball at all. So that should help the Eagles' pass defense, making them one-dimensional. It's just a tough matchup for them. They don't match up well with how the Eagles are built.
John, so you've been talking a lot about the defense and that it's not as bad as maybe people are making it out to be, and I'm with you, and the league has shifted, but just on the offensive side of the ball, last year the Eagles were 3rd in the league in points per game, 7th in the league in yards per game. This year, points per game, they're 26th in the league. How do they get this – and obviously there's a lot of factors to that, but how do they get this ball rolling this week against this Vikings team from an offensive side of things? What can we expect to see, and how do they come out of the gates hot?
Well, I think the big issue with the Eagles has been sort of shooting themselves in the foot, be it pre-snap penalties, be it miscommunication on the offensive line, the backs and blitz pickup and things of that ilk. So if they play a clean game, I don't think they're going to have any problem going up and down the field against this team, because one of the issues with Minnesota is pre-snap motion. They have a lot of difficulty with that, and the Eagles are one of the best teams in football at that. That's another one of those style matchups. If you look at it's basically the Andy Reid part of it, because if you look, Chicago does it well, Philadelphia does it well. The Rams would be the other team that don't have an Andy Reid acolyte. But so all of the trends point to Philadelphia, and not to mention the fact they just don't lose at Lincoln Financial Field. But you got to show up and do it, and that's the part where the desperation comes in that Eitan was talking about, and that part of it is real because Minnesota's going to be pulling out all the stops.
John, it's funny because it sounds so simple just to say they're not as good on the road, they're better at home. Like you're saying, so matter-of-factly, they just don't lose at Lincoln Financial. 15-3 under Doug in the home building and whatever. Yeah. Josh sent me a stat earlier that was very Joshy, but I'll have to pull it back up for you here.
That sounds somewhat complicated.
15-3 at home
Josh
since the start.
Thank you?
The Eagles are 15-3 at home since the start of 16 with Peterson as the head coach. So it goes back to it just sounds so matter of fact that they're just a flat-out better team, like most teams are, but it seems that it's drastic. Like last year, their losses were at Seattle, a non-playoff team, at Kansas City, a playoff team but not a Super Bowl threat.
Right.
They gave up 38 points in L.A. Now, they won that game, but they still gave up 38. It's evident that the splits seem different, and it just seems that some people are having a hard time with that. I know Ryan's one of them.
I am one of them.
Yeah, no, I'm not knocking you. I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me,
Damn
John, can I just jump in real quick, and then I'll let you make me look dumb with all of your smart and rational answers. For me, it's not just about the stats and the wins and losses. It's some of the non-measurable things. So I keep going back to this, but I'm going to keep going back to it. 3 4th downs in Tennessee that they can't get one stop like that. Those are the stops they got last year. And now, Tampa Bay, I don't believe Tampa Bay is going to be much of anything towards the end of the season. We're going to look back on that loss and say, man, we gave up 27 in Tampa Bay. So it's more of how they've lost and the lack of stops when it matters that I guess raises my eyebrows a little bit.
Well, we talked about situational football. Now, the Eagles have been real good at that, and it kind of blew up in Tennessee. Maybe that's just regressing to the mean because they've been in so many big spots in the past and they've succeeded. But as a whole, when you're talking home versus road, I mean, that's the mentality of every team in this league. You take care of business at home and you split on the road. If you do that, you win 12 games and you're off and running. And that's sort of what everyone tries to emulate. Now, maybe you lose one at home and win an extra one on the road. But that's the way this league has worked for a really long time. It's really, really difficult to win on the road. And when you are having a 14, 15-win season, which is rare, you win everywhere. But it's you know, Jim Schwartz talks about it all the time. It's just much more difficult to win on the road. And it is as simple as that, especially when you have a home field advantage like Philadelphia, where these people make the kind of noise to where you can go back to the NFC Championship game. People kind of forget because it was a blowout. The Vikings were playing well early in that game until the Chris Long hurry, the interception, and that huge jolt that was like an earthquake that people heard all the way in South Jersey, and the game was over. It was 7-7 on the scoreboard, but the game was over. It's tough to play on the road in this league.
Hey, John, I'm curious if you think that, just based on how unique the start of the season is, if people normally are used to judging a team after the first 4 weeks, but this is not a team we can truly judge. We've only had 2 weeks of Carson Wentz. It's been a different quarterback in here. Injuries have played a factor, but mainly the quarterback situation. And you know the area well. Nobody's going to be patient, especially a month into a season. But it's almost like we need 2 more weeks, which is not normal, to kind of get the identity of this football team. Do you agree with that?
Well, I do, and I said early in the week, I said in 11 days everybody's going to be happy because the Eagles are going to be 4-2. They're going to beat the Vikings. They're going to go up the Turnpike and beat the Giants. And
Fair enough.
From that standpoint, you know, people are going to be too excited. They're going to get too high. They're going to think this team's great, and there are issues that they need to work on. So it is. I mean, you know, John, you've been around a while as well. You know how it is. People overreact. They get too high after wins, too lows after losses. It's always somewhere in between. You would like the Eagles to be 3-1 at this point. And if they stop one of those fourth down plays, they are 3-1. And if you said 3-1 with Carson Wentz playing 2 games, you're in really, really good shape. I still think ultimately this team will take off because they're too talented. And they're in the second part, maybe even bigger than that, they're in a bad division.
Yeah, but let me ask you this. Let me interject this.
Brutal
okay,
division,
I agree with you with the division thing. But where are they in your mind with the Rams, the Saints, Carolina, Packers? I don't know if you want to throw the Bears in there just yet, but do you think there's more depth in the conference that is concerning? Because, quite frankly, John, they do play a lot of the teams I just mentioned still. The Saints, the Carolina Panthers, the Rams. So I get what you're saying, and I tend to agree with you, but there's more depth in this schedule than there was a year ago.
Yeah, but that's what I said. Well, there's always going to be when you're playing a first-place schedule because you're playing other first-place teams. So, in theory, it's going to be more difficult. But if anything, the NFC is not as good as we thought it was going to be at the beginning of the season. So some of those games, and this is another example, Minnesota is a perfect example. That looked really, really difficult. Now it doesn't look that difficult. Things change drastically in this league very, very quickly. So I think every team you mentioned, I think the Eagles can beat with the possible exception of the Rams, and people are going gaga over the Rams, and rightfully so offensively, but they got a lot of issues defensively. They gave up a ton of points to Minnesota while they outscored them. Remember, this is the Vikings team that can't block anybody, and they're still giving up big gas plays. So they have Aaron Donald. They have Ndamukong too, and those two guys are great. But what else do they have? Well, they had the corners, but Aqib Talib is gone. He could be lost for the entire year. Marcus Peters is banged up but playing. They have no edge rushers. So they are a team you can outscore. Now, I think the Rams would be favored if they played today, and the issue becomes they're in a bad division as well, so they're going to coast and win 13 games. So that game's probably going to be in Los Angeles. And then when you talk about home versus road, you're playing on the road. Now, the good news there, and we're obviously speculating way down the road, Los Angeles isn't Philadelphia. It isn't Green Bay. It isn't New England. It isn't Foxborough. We have this tremendous home field advantage. So that's some of the positives you can spin.
John, question for you if you're Doug Peterson talking to Carson Wentz this week, factoring in everything, the advantage that they have with the matchup, but also knowing that they've struggled protecting the quarterback from the offensive line, as you mentioned, the running backs as well. What's the one thing you're focused on with Carson Wentz improving that you haven't seen so far in 2 games from him?
I think he's played really well.
I do too.
One thing you concern yourself with Carson Wentz is sort of a catch-22. He's the kind of guy who wants to extend plays.
Right.
And that is sort of a demarcation line that you have to live with. Because at times he's going to make these huge plays out of nothing, and that off-schedule offense helps you so much. And at other times he's going to hold on to the football, hold on to the football, hold on to the football. You got a strip sack, and the ball's going the other way. So I'll just say I'd prefer to have the guy who's extending plays and making big plays. That's just something you have to live with. But as far as what Carson can do better, look, he didn't play 9.5 months. He stepped onto the football field. He's got better mobility than Nick Foles. Obviously, he's a stronger arm. He's a better quarterback. But the most impressive thing is his ability to handle things at the line of scrimmage, to run the pass, vice versa, to change, to get out of a bad play. Might be a running play. Just change from right to left because he sees the overloaded box. The guy's really good. You can always improve, but it's hard to point to something and say, wow, he's doing this really poorly.
All right, John, tomorrow we'll have plenty more on this game, including John's pick for the game. And, of course, you can get all the coverage from John McMullen at 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter as we get you ready for the Eagles and Vikings, a pretty important matchup for these two teams. I mean, if the team that loses this game, the story on Monday will be very interesting in their respective cities. John McMullen, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk on the Hotline. Johnny Mac, thanks, pal.
Hey, thank you, guys.